Science, sex, and power. The artist. If there is nothing beyond that, if only the naive believe that there is anything noble about humanity beyond the immediate demand of reproduction, then what have you got to say that's moral about sex? And why the hell shouldn't everybody just do exactly what they want with whoever they want, whenever they want, all the time? The last question seems to be tempted by lust. Someone cries out from the audience, "Woohoo!" He starts laughing. And with power, you can make the same argument. This is his process of rationalizing why sex should not be worship, or power, or sex and power. It is like he is calling out to people who would be following or worshipping science, sex, and power. Science coming from the tree of knowledge argument, sex coming from the deadly sin of lust, power coming from the delusions of grandeur. It is like once the scientist begins to feel fatigue in his rational faculties, he would start complaining to God with questions. What have you got to say that's moral about sex? God could answer him explaining how it is moral to fulfill one another's needs. To fulfill one another's needs. Sex is moral in a sense that it can somewhat tailor the life of the two partners to fit the life of the other. It is a drive that is meant to be satisfied for the whole body, or both bodies, to be able to continue its daily functions. It can be seen as a moral programming method in a sense, where the two schedules of the counterparts would be aligned to fit each other. The cogs would be so precise that the biological clocks would work in sync with one another. Sex is a moral drive that was made permissible for humans to use in order for them to be able to live with one another. A husband and wife would find sex to be a routine activity that they can both participate in. It is a game that both players can play together in a childish manner. A man is not supposed to act like a man, and a woman is not supposed to act like a woman. They can act as though they are children with one another. Once dominance in a relationship was established, all notions of sickness in relationship were eliminated. Sex is moral when it is done with two partners who were, at the very least, created to fit one another. It starts to reek disgust when it starts to use body parts that are not supposed to be utilized in such ways. Sex would be immoral if decency was removed. Thus, the morality of sex culminates when dominance in a relationship is asserted by the household husbandess male. The notion of masculinity was meant to be met with femininity to dominate it. It is not only that Adam cried out to God, "The woman made me do it." It is more that by putting the blame over her shoulders, the male had given up on her punishment before she was even judged for her temptation to him. In other words, Adam had instead asked forgiveness for both of them upon knowledge of God's displeasure with their actions. Instead of throwing the blame onto the woman, they were both made to represent the other partner's mirror image. In a sense, the blame was duly divided between them both without the woman saying anything in her defense. Sex and power are two different utilities. Since sex can be used morally, albeit out of survival necessity for the whole species, this survival must be maintained by the use of dominance rather than power. It is not power domestically in the sense that the breadwinner would be able to assert their dominance using whichever means necessary, that they would be blessed with the power to command anything out of the sheer conception or understanding that power belongs to them. In fact, out of our generational entitlement and taking our own opinions for granted, we think that by obtaining certain knowledge we would be entitled to relationship rights that are only permissible for us. Thus, sex becomes a personal driver rather than a thing of worship, an instinctual action that requires to be satiated. The pleasures of sex are just reminders of the blissfulness that awaits in paradise. Neither sex nor power can be a thing to worship. They can't be. They are just a utility to give some lives meaning. Pay attention to the strongest or suffer the consequences. Well, is there something beyond that? That's not mere naivety. It is like the lecturer was being questioned about his earlier point when he said that only naive people like that. What's if it isn't power that's the story, and if it isn't sex that's the story, what's the story? The story for me is in the different alterations of a person's speech patterns that would allow for the lecturer to speak as though he is Donald Trump when the topic being discussed is power. If he sounds like a certain person, does that mean he is influenced by the other person? If the lecturer speaks like Donald Trump is speaking from the perspective of grantifying and grandifying power, elevating it to the rank of a philosophical dilemma, that sounds to be the story. An imitator is a person who can successfully capture the voice through the ideas. An imitator would be able to bring out the best and the worst in people through their imitation. It is not until the United States became a superpower that people have started to consider, for a tiny bit, that they ruled the world with power. It is no wonder that any ideas of elevating power to a high standard would even be permissible on stage. It is no wonder he even threatened his own self, saying, "Pay attention to the strongest or suffer the consequences." Who is the strongest but God? He is essentially making a case against his own self. The story could be knowing how to use a term in a beneficial statement, a good statement, or some kind of sentence that has at least an ounce of goodness or a significant amount thereof. Whether people learn or not, whether they are deceived or guided, it is not a matter of determination that can be governed by human power. It is not the capacity of humans to simultaneously determine their needs and satiate their own hunger without making a decision to get on their feet and move to secure their own sustenance. What power would that be associated with but the power of deception of one's own true limits? Since God is the strongest, it is fair to believe that only through the grace of God anyone would receive power, and even the ability to stand on their feet. If he so willed, he would shake the ground underneath your feet and would cause you to perish, and no creature would be able to stop his will from occurring. Not your thoughts, not your armies, not your political influence, not your strongholds, your castles, your towers, or even your bunkers and science. Science. As though science itself would grow any bigger than can be possible to restrict infinity. It is no wonder that the concept of infinity is present in science we know to be true. in mathematical thinking to determine the boundaries of the unknown when a limit approaches infinity. For how long would the line extend before meeting another? For how much time will it continue to do that until it reaches a line? What if they never really meet, but they are supposed to meet at one point? What if they never really meet, but they are supposed to meet at one point? What if we just have to wait? What if time is really the invisible factor that no one can really see within every equation? How things require time, and this line will meet another at some point in an infinity is approached. What if the line is given more time? When we give them more time, they become more sinful. The longer the human race is left to wander blindly, the more sinful they become. This is why God is patient with the sinners. By giving them more time, waiting for them to repent, God is not in active involvement with their affairs. If God leaves a sinful nation to its devices, they would only increase in insolence. He sends them guidance, lest the sinner cries out in hell, proclaiming that he was not given signs in his life. You have been given signs. It is not a discussion that you have with the audience, since you clearly stated that you do not perceive them once you start a lecture. Why would it be entertaining if it is educational? Well, since it is educational, what new truths were presented? That science should not be followed, so as to not worship it like some people worship sex and power? I don't know which is more preposterous, to listen to a ramble by someone complaining to God about the lack of scientific evidence for certain areas of science, or to aggrandize science, sex, and power. At times, it is better to think on paper than to think in front of an audience. At least when thinking on paper, you have more control of what you write and whose ideas you summarize in your speech. Look, if you go to a movie or read a complex book, I believe what he was referring to with the complex book is the Quran. If you read a complex book, or what you claim to be a complex book, then you would understand what the story is. But he goes on to speak about a work of fiction as a complex book. A sophisticated work of fiction has a hero, and perhaps an anti-hero, with complex multidimensional motivations. How does a human try to explain reality by relying on a work of fiction? You're watching the hero to know how to act like a hero. When you're watching a movie and you watch the anti-hero or the villain, you're watching the movie to learn how not to fail catastrophically and land in hell while taking everyone else with you. It is reducible to something as simple as power and sex. Is it reducible to something as simple as power and sex? Not if it's not a comic book. It is like he is asking for the logic behind having power and sex be the simplest ideas and concept that could be incarnated as objects to follow down to hell. If there is any other simpler ideas that people would follow and worship, it would make it more comical. It would render the whole purpose of creation vain and illogical. Therefore, it has to have been as though someone is reading a comic book, as though they would be showing other people their final records and they find it to be a joke. How could people live their lives like that? To worship power or sex throughout their lives as the ultimate goal and principle of life and purpose of existence. It is no wonder that those who will be surely given their records in their left hand would hide it behind their backs. it is comical to think that they have spent their entire lives drenched in desires for power and lust. They would hide their left hands behind their backs because they would be too ashamed to become a mockery right from the start of the journey. It is no wonder that this scenario would have definitely been removed by having them follow their leaders towards hellfire down the pit. It would be a time of seriousness, and it would be a time of judgment. You need a multidimensional characterization. If you want to understand the characters of the complex book, again, in this sense, the Quran, you would definitely need a multidimensional characterization to understand its significance. It is not something that can be fathomed or dissected for proof or for understanding without first thinking about it in all its dimensions and especially the dimension of time. Since this complex book that is very sophisticated is used to determine everything in the world, whether you hear a certain thought in your mind or you voice out a specific opinion in a manner that is known to resemble some other person who isn't you. Since it is so sophisticated, it can give you answers to all forms of questions that you would ask. Its reasoning is very eloquent in itself. It's not only eloquent in the form of speech or word choice. Coming to a moral decision about all manners is done in a wise and unparalleled manner. It is not unlikely that it was spoken in such a way that provides coherence through eloquence and structure. It is not a complex book if you come to it from the perspective of belief and knowing that it is the truth. At the end of the day, it is whether a person is searching for the truth or looking for a story. It has many stories that can be used to deliver the moral easily to children. It is no wonder that children can memorize quickly when they are still young. They have not yet been polluted with the ideas of power, sex, or other sinful inclinations. They are still pure. Who decides whether what you're going to decide is either good or bad? Who decides whether the next decision you're going to make, even if it's only decided mentally, is a decision of life or death for you? It is no wonder that decisions drive infinite possibilities of parallel universes and destinies. If by making a decision the person is being compelled to take a stance, either accept an idea or contest it, either believe in something or disbelieve in it, or whether we would actually be willing to choose when we are presented with this plethora of infinite possibilities. We don't know which decision in life could mean a catastrophical end for us. We don't know which decision in life could mean a catastrophical end for us. When presented with a choice in the beginning, we come to it with a prejudiced eye, with a conception that we actually know what we're getting ourselves into. When we are asked to give an opinion, we are into conflict of deciding whether to give the opinion from the morally permissible sense or to give the opinion out of our sheer understanding and preference to the topic being discussed. If we are presented with two options, one of which is obviously good and the other is obviously bad, some of us choose to lean towards the good from a natural disposition towards the good. It is a moral compass. Other people choose to go towards the bad because they are taught and used to selecting the bad in every situation prior to this decision being made. If one option is good and another is bad, then we are told to choose between two extremes. But life is not a yes no question, which can easily be lived through with coin flips. You can't decide your own life based on coin flips. It is like throwing your decision making out the window or causing someone else to determine your fate. If presented with a choice between good and bad, we are compelled to make the decision that aligns with our upbringing, morality, manners, and value, such that when someone has a habit which he developed growing up, he made the choice to begin to do the habit and practice this habit out of value. Why would someone choose to engage in some ritual or the other without it having value for him? Why would a habit cultivate beliefs had it not been for its effect on our decision making faculties? If someone believes in a certain effect of a certain action, then they would be more inclined to redo the action several times to revel in the benefits and rewards of said action. All throughout the habit, however, whether it is going to gym or running or jogging across the meadows of the park next door, there is always this voice of reason which calls to question the value we've ascribed to such a habit. Does the value come from the fact that the active member is walking among the trees, sniffing the aroma produced by the flowers, or reviving the ecstasy received by the influx of memories associated with the park? It is not unlikely that some forms of reasoning would exhaust three logical explanations before we start delving into doubt with the fourth. I sometimes wonder if the significance of the number three comes from it being an exhaustion of rewarded possibilities as an answer to what could I have thought to do any better. It is like when the first time we choose to do something is driven by our prejudices, but also beliefs. The second time we choose to do something is driven by our satisfaction with the results of the first time. And the third time would be a point where we have to get ready for what's coming. Because it is upon the third time that we start to develop our own motive and drive to continue doing the habit. You don't go to the gym every day or every 2 days once you initially decide to start going to the gym. You first set your mind towards going to the gym. In setting your mind, you're avoiding prejudices and other handicaps preventing you from considering how going to the gym might be helpful to your own health, mental or physical. The next time you go to the gym, you are telling the world this is a valued experience, and the world rearranges itself to fit your schedule, as a wife makes the house joyous for her husband. The third time you go to the gym, you're developing excuses and justifications for why going to the gym is going to be helpful for you. You try to pinpoint with accuracy through running through probabilities the reasons why this habit you've just started makes sense to you. The fourth time is when you begin to recalculate your perspective. It is when the multitude of values you associated with the action begin to crumble, and when your own principled thinking becomes entangled with the possibilities that you can continue listing with no purpose, because it means nothing for any other person than you. If, when you started going to the gym, you began to do it for this world or to please another person, then all the efforts would be in vain. It is between the third time and the fourth time that you are first introduced to doubt and meaning in the act. It is no wonder why the number pi begins after the number 3 in decimals. You have already crossed half the turn towards a full, sustainable circle or a feedback loop. Eat food, gain weight. Go to the gym, lose weight. It is a cycle that is designed to cause the illusion of order through its obscured chaos. Periodicity is governed by the law of mathematics. Because periodic actions are sometimes given the value of beautiful when they are done for the sake of God, and thus it comes as no surprise that mathematics, which God had decreed would govern our physical world along with physics working hand in hand, and they would also be considered beautiful. It is no wonder that mathematics had become an object to revel at ever since the time of the ancients. In reductionist theology, even the golden ratio can be explained through its own counterpart. That if you can divide the frame into 4 equal areas, it wouldn't be the first 3 areas which would contain the most important object in the picture, it is the fourth. The rationality behind having 3 previous areas is so that the viewer would be compelled to make a choice between which of the 4 areas is more valuable. Thus, the fourth area would also contain the object that is most flaunted by the artist.